Which statement, if true, would most strongly support the claim in the underlined sentence? Okay, so we have to support this claim. Let's read the background. Sandra Cisneros' 84 novella, The House on Mango Street, made a lasting impact on U.S. literature. Its depiction of a Mexican-American culture inspired later authors to examine their own heritage with their fictional works. Also influential was the book's portrayal of the main character, Esperanza, Hope, during a pivotal year of her youth. This insightful depiction of a preteen girl encouraged authors who, like Cisneros herself, are Latina, to use fictional works to examine experiences from their own youth. So the claim here is, did this book inspire preteen authors, Latina preteen authors, to use fictional works from their own background? So A, in interviews, a number of Latina authors say The House on Mango Street inspired them to write about their own adolescence in their novels. That's it. Yes, there is an example that shows other preteen authors inspired by Cisneros. Let's just check B. In published writings, several prominent authors who are not Latino, well, that's not the issue, influence their approach to writing fiction. Well, they're not Latino authors, so that's not right, okay? And they're prominent authors. They're not preteen authors, right? So The House on Mango Street has sold over 6 million copies. Again, it's successful. It's popular. Always the wrong answer. D, since 1984, new novels about young Latina characters by Latino authors have often been compared to The House on Mango Street. Okay, the fact that they're compared to the house doesn't show they were inspired by. That's not the same thing. A is the correct answer. If true, which would directly support the researcher's conclusion? So we'll have to figure out what the researcher's conclusion is. Looks like it's right there. Let's go ahead and read the background. Rivers rich in sediment appear yellow, while increases in red algae make rivers appear red. Okay, so sediment, yellow, algae, red. To track things like the sediment or algae content of large U.S. rivers, Gardner and his colleagues used satellite data to determine the dominant visible wavelengths of light measured for various segments of these rivers. The researchers classified wavelengths of 495 nanometers and below as red, so less than 495 or less than and equal to. Wavelengths between 495 and 560 is blue, and 560 and above greater than or equal to as yellow. So higher wavelengths, yellow, the lower wavelengths, red. Okay. They concluded that for the Missouri River, segments flowing into lakes tend to carry more sediment than those flowing out of lakes. So if they're more sediment, they would have to be yellow, would be the idea. So let's see if we find evidence of that. The segments of the Missouri River that had higher levels of chlorophyll, which contributes to the green color. No, there's nothing about green color. That's not our claim. Okay. In lakes through which segments of the Missouri River pass, the dominant wavelength of light tended to be above 560 near the lake shores and below 560 in the centers. So that's yellow. Yellow at the shore, if we think about it. Yellow near the shore and less than that in the middle. Why would that suggest that flowing into lakes is yellow? Does the water flowing into a lake necessarily go around the shore? I don't think so. I don't think that supports our point. Okay. The majority of the segments of the Missouri River were found to have dominant wavelengths of light significantly higher than 560. So most of the Missouri is yellow. And they concluded that for the Missouri River, segments flowing into lakes from the Missouri tend to carry more sediment than flowing out of lakes. So that would be the Missouri flows in yellow, and the Missouri is itself yellow. That makes sense, okay? So let's hold on to that one, and we'll check D. D, segments of the Missouri River flowing into lakes typically had dominant wavelengths of light above 560. So into lakes, mostly yellow, while segments flowing out of lakes typically had dominant lengths below. Okay, so in was yellow into the lake, and then out was green or red. Does that really matter, that second part? flowing into lakes carry more sediment than those flowing out of lakes. Yeah, if they're flowing out of lakes, they wouldn't be yellow. So more sediment and less sediment out of lakes would be not yellow. That would be the answer. That's actually the correct answer. This says nothing about flowing out of lakes, so that's not the full answer. D is correct. Which quote from Miss Spring Fragrance's letters most effectively illustrates the claim? Okay, so let's figure out what this claim is. Mrs. Spring Fragrance is a 1912 short story by such and such. In the story, Mrs. Spring Fragrance, a Chinese immigrant living in Seattle, is traveling in California. In letters to her husband and friend, she demonstrates her concern for what's happening at her home in Seattle while she is away. So most effectively illustrates the claim. What's the claim here, though? There's a story that's background the story. A Chinese immigrant living in Seattle is traveling in California. In a letter to her husband and friend, she demonstrates concern for what's happening at her home in Seattle. Okay, so which quote shows concern for something going on in Seattle? A, my honorable cousin is preparing for the Fifth Moon Festival and wishes me to compound for the occasion some American fudge, for which delectable sweet, made by my clumsy hands, you have sometimes shown a slight prejudice. I don't think that really shows anything about concern for Seattle. Next week, I accompany Aoi to the beauteous town of San Jose. There we'll be met by the sons of the illustrious teacher. That concern for what's happening in her home in Seattle? Not really. C, forget not to care for the cat, the birds, and the flowers. Do not eat too quickly nor fan too vigorously now that the weather is warming. That's definitely concern for home. In Seattle? I don't think that it says Seattle, but definitely concern for home here. D, I am enjoying a most agreeable visit, and American friends, as also our own, strive benevolently for the accomplishment of my pleasure. That's not concern. The only one that shows concern for home is C. We don't know it's Seattle, but apparently it is, so that must be the answer, the best answer available. If true, which would most directly support the team's conclusion? So what's the conclusion of the team? Right there. Okay, let's read the background and evidence. Plants like potatoes, tomatoes, and soybeans are susceptible to bacterial wilt disease caused by the bacteria such and such. A multinational team of scientists led by Wei studied whether there are other microbes in the soil might influence the degree to which plants are affected by the disease. So the claim is that this bacteria causes the wilt, and we want to know from this scientist, do other bacteria also have influence? The team sampled soil surrounding individual tomato plants and over time and compared the results of plants that became diseased with those that remained healthy. They concluded that the presence of certain microbes in the soil might explain the difference between healthy and diseased plants. So certain microbes, right? So is that more than this? It seems to be there are more microbes. So what would support this idea that we have other bacteria or other microbes other than this one? So the soil surrounding healthy plants contain significantly higher concentrations of microbes known to inhibit such and such than the soil surrounding diseased plants did. No, that doesn't make sense. Healthy plants have higher microbes. We want more microbes around the diseased plants, right? Presence of microbes in soil might explain the difference between healthy and diseased plants. So that's kind of the opposite. The soil surrounding the plants contain high concentrations of this bacteria, regardless of whether the plants were affected by wilt disease. Okay, they concluded the presence of certain microbes in soil might explain the difference. That doesn't really, that's all about the original bacteria. That doesn't show anything about other microbes having an influence. Okay, actually, I crossed it out. I might actually just put a question mark on it because it's showing an effect of microbes. Not necessarily the effect we want, but it doesn't tell you what the difference or the effect is exactly anyway. So let's see, say, The soil surrounding healthy plants tended to have significantly higher moisture levels than the soil surrounding diseased plants. Okay, microbes and high moisture levels, we don't know if there's a connection there or not, according to the text. D, by the end of the experiment, over half the plants had been affected by wilt disease, regardless of the different types and concentrations of microbes. So there's no effect from microbes, or mitigates the effect of microbes. I think A is the answer. The soil surrounding healthy plants contained higher concentrations of microbes that are known to inhibit the bacteria than the soil surrounding. So the microbes have an effect on the disease. And they concluded the presence of microbes explains the difference between healthy and diseased. Yeah, they don't say which way. Apparently the microbes are helpful, not hurtful. So A would be the correct answer. If true, which finding about the basin supports Cardinia's and Lamb's conclusion? Okay. Here's what they concluded. Although it's clear that Mars once had liquid water on its surface, astronomers have debated whether the evidence of ancient water reflects a prolonged phase of warm, wet conditions, the so-called wet and warm scenario. So is there a prolonged phase of warm, wet conditions? Okay, that's what we call this scenario. Or a brief period of melting in an otherwise consistently frozen environment. Researchers such and such recently added to this debate by using data from NASA and Mars Orbiter to map the topography of what is now a large basin in Mars's northern hemisphere. Cardinius and Lamb concluded that the wet and warm scenario is likely correct. So they say there was a prolonged phase of warm, wet conditions. It wasn't just ice melting and then going away quickly. Okay, that there actually was maybe rivers, lakes, things like that. Okay, so all right, we need evidence of that. Its dimension and shape, that is the large basin, indicate that it is unlikely to have formed as a result of an asteroid. Well, that says nothing about a prolonged phase of warm, wet condition. It has features suggesting that it once held an ocean that underwent gradual sea level changes over an extended time. Yeah, that would suggest a prolonged phase of warm, wet conditions. There was actually an ocean. That looks like it's going to be our answer. Let's check C and D. Its physical characteristics are most consistent. Most, that's extreme. With it having formed as a result of a massive but short-lived influx of liquid water. Well, massive but short-lived would not be our prolonged phase. That would be the quick unfreezing phase. That's wrong. D, it is surrounded by channels that could have been formed either by running water or by flowing lava. Well, flowing lava would not be a warm, wet condition, right? So that doesn't actually support our case. So D is not the right answer. The fact that there could have been an ocean there, or likely was, is evidence. B.